Long before the rise of Alexander the Great, before the name Macedonia carried the weight of empire, the land itself told a quieter story. It was a rugged region, a mixture of fertile plains, deep forests, and harsh mountains stretching between the Aegean Sea and the great Balkan interior. To the west lay Illyria, a land of warrior tribes and fortified hill settlements. To the east, Thrace, wild, rich, and mystical. And to the south, the city-states of Greece, proud and sophisticated, yet often divided among themselves. This borderland, caught between three great cultural worlds, was where Macedonia emerged. It was not an isolated place, but a crossroads. Traders and warriors passed through, languages mingled, and traditions overlapped. In these lands, local tribes like the Brygians, Paeonians, and Lyncestians thrived, each with their own customs, gods, and dialects. Some had links to the Illyrians, others to the Thracians, and some perhaps to the early Greeks. It was a place of transition, a zone where no single identity could easily dominate. Before the rise of a unified Macedonian kingdom, these tribes were often in conflict, raiding one another, forming short-lived alliances, and surviving through the cycles of war and trade. Yet from this diversity, something began to form. A shared way of life centered around clan loyalty, horsemanship, and warrior culture. The people here valued strength, honor, and endurance. They were known for their fierce independence and their skill in battle, characteristics that would later define Macedon's kings and soldiers alike. Ancient Greek writers described these northern peoples as barbarians, meaning those who did not speak Greek fluently or live according to Greek customs. But that word, barbarian, hides the truth. Macedonia was never culturally empty. Its people had their own rich traditions, burial mounds that honored fallen warriors, shrines to nature gods, and rituals tied to the cycles of the land. Their dialects contained traces of Greek, Illyrian, and even Thracian influence, reflecting centuries of contact. So when the Macedonians eventually began to rise, they didn't appear out of nowhere. They were the product of centuries of blending, a people forged by their geography. Their homelands sat between the civilized cities of Greece and the wilder highlands of the north, giving them the strength of both worlds. They understood trade and diplomacy, but also war and survival. It's in this mix, between mountain and sea, between tribe and kingdom, that the Macedonian identity began to take shape. When the Argead dynasty began to take power in the early 1st millennium BCE, the tribes of the north were still loosely connected. But through diplomacy, marriage, and conquest, the early Macedonian kings started to unite them under one banner. Among these early rulers stood King Amyntas, and later King Philip II, men whose leadership would turn Macedonia from a scattered tribal realm into a regional powerhouse. Philip's vision reshaped everything. He reorganized the military, introducing the famous Macedonian phalanx, rows of soldiers wielding long spears, moving as a single unstoppable unit. He built alliances with Illyrian chieftains, fought off Thracian incursions, and slowly pushed south into Greek territory. Yet even as Macedonia rose, its identity remained debated. To the Greeks of Athens or Sparta, the Macedonians were still outsiders. Their kings might speak a dialect of Greek, but their customs, their drinking feasts, warrior tattoos, and tribal ceremonies looked far more northern. Macedonian nobles often traced their ancestry to Heracles, claiming Greek heritage, but their way of life reflected centuries of contact with Illyrian and Thracian neighbors. Their art, weaponry, and burial traditions showed a unique mixture. Bronze helmets and armor similar to Greek designs, but burial mounds and warrior symbols rooted in the Illyrian and Thracian world. Even the royal capital of Argead seemed like a hybrid, a Greek-style city surrounded by rugged tribal territories. The Macedonian kings adopted Greek gods and language for diplomacy and legitimacy, yet at home they still ruled as warrior chieftains. This duality was the secret to their strength. They could speak to both worlds, to the polished Greek cities and to the fierce mountain tribes. Philip II's conquest of Greece did not Hellenize Macedonia overnight. Instead, it spread Macedonian influence into the Greek world, flipping the dynamic. And when his son, Alexander, was born and raised, tutored by Aristotle yet trained by warlords, the question of identity became even more complex. Was Macedonia Greek, or something older, broader, born from the mixing of Balkan bloodlines that predated Greece itself? By the time Philip united the Balkans under his crown, the Macedonian kingdom had become a bridge between civilizations, militarily Greek, culturally Balkan, and geographically at the center of everything. To truly understand who the Macedonians were, one must look beyond their kings and conquests, into their language, religion, and daily life. Ancient sources often describe the Macedonian tongue as a strange variation of Greek, yet not quite the same. Some ancient writers called it a barbarian dialect, while others claimed it was simply an archaic form of Greek. Inscriptions from Macedon show both Greek and local linguistic influences, suggesting a gradual blending, not a clean divide. Many modern linguists still argue whether the Macedonian language was Greek in origin, or a separate Indo-European branch with Illyrian and Thracian ties. Religiously, the Macedonians worshipped Zeus, Dionysus, and Apollo, but often in distinctly local forms. At their mountain shrines, one could find sacrifices to deities that seemed half Greek, half tribal. Gods like Sabazios and Bendis were Thracian imports, while warlike local spirits mirrored Illyrian traditions. Even their burial rituals, with monumental mounds and richly armed warriors, reflected the customs of their northern neighbors far more than those of the city-states to the south. Archaeology deepens the mystery. Excavations at sites like Vagina and Pella show a people who embraced Greek art and architecture, yet their motifs, suns, lions, serpents, carry Balkan symbolism. Their goldwork and weaponry reveal a craftsmanship that blends Greek finesse with Illyrian ferocity. Then there's the political aspect. The Macedonian monarchy functioned differently from Greek democracies. It was personal, hereditary, and tribal, a king surrounded by loyal companions, the hetairoi. These men were not elected politicians. They were warrior nobles who owed their power to bloodlines, alliances, and conquest. This system resembled Illyrian and Thracian kingdoms much more than the Greek polis. In short, Macedonian identity was not purely Greek, nor purely Illyrian or Thracian. It was a synthesis, a result of centuries of cultural exchange, warfare, and intermarriage. And that hybrid nature might be exactly why they became such a powerful civilization. Because they were adaptable, they could speak Greek in the south, fight like Illyrians in the north, and rule like kings of both worlds. The legacy of the ancient Macedonians didn't end with Alexander's death. It only became more complicated. When Rome absorbed Macedon, it inherited not just a territory, but a people whose origins were already fiercely debated. And that debate didn't fade with time. It only grew louder. In the modern Balkans, the question of who the real Macedonians were has become deeply political. Greece claims them as part of its ancient Hellenic heritage, pointing to language, religion, and art that clearly tie to Greek culture. Meanwhile, in the north, others emphasize the distinct tribal traditions, the differences in political organization, and the evidence of Balkan blending, arguing that Macedon stood apart, a frontier kingdom shaped by Illyrian and Thracian blood as much as by Greek thought. Archaeology continues to offer clues, but also contradictions. The grand tombs of Vagina, the royal palace at Pella, the inscriptions in Greek, all show a people fluent in the Hellenic world. Yet, the warrior burials, mountain fortresses, and local cults remind us of something older, something wilder, a Macedon that looked both south and north for its identity. Even genetics adds fuel to the fire. Modern studies across the Balkans reveal overlapping DNA patterns, showing that the ancient peoples of this region, whether Illyrian, Thracian, or Macedonian, were closely related. Their descendants, scattered across today's borders, still carry echoes of those ancient tribes. But DNA alone can't define culture, language, or heritage. Those belong to identity, and identity is shaped as much by story as by blood. So perhaps the real answer isn't whether the Macedonians were Greek, Illyrian, or Thracian. It's that they were all of them, and none of them. They were the bridge that connected these worlds, and from that mix came one of the greatest empires in history. That's the uncomfortable truth. History doesn't fit neatly into modern borders, and the ancient Macedonians, like so many peoples of the Balkans, belong to a world far too complex to claim with certainty. If you enjoyed this dive into Balkan history, and you think you know who the Macedonians really were, share your thoughts below, because even after 2,000 years, the question still divides empires and unites the people who remember them.